like a tree that's planted by the water. I shall not be moved. I shall not be. I shall not be moved. I shall not be. I shall not be moved. That's planted by the waters. I shall not be moved. As will not fail me. Come on, speed it up. You're dragging it. All right, all right, all right. Welcome to the Waycast. We are in First Peter chapter 1 tonight, and the introduction to Peter. I have great news. I was at Enrich tonight. They invited me. Mike invited me to come and teach a lesson on powerless, and a little girl got saved, and there was a whole flood of people came forward to get blue chips and to hug me, and it was a wonderful time. And so I've felt blessed to do that, and I appreciate Mike allowing me to come and doing that. That he entrusts me with that and counts me as a mentor. I think is how he introduced me, and that was very touching. I really appreciate that. So we have first here an introduction to Peter. This isn't the introduction to chapter 1. This is the introduction to Peter. And Simon Peter, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the strangers. First Peter chapter 1 and verse 1. So we have intrigue. Peter has been called to the ignorant fisherman, but no man who had spent 3 years in the school of Christ could be called ignorant. The epistle of Peter confirms this. Peter deals with doctrine and handles weighty subjects. In the first few verses, he deals with great doctrines of the great doctrine of election, foreknowledge, sanctification, obedience, the blood of Christ, the Trinity, the grace of God, salvation, revelation, glory, faith, and hope. So you feel like you've been to Bible school yet? My friend, you just couldn't have any more doctrine crowded into a few verses. The way in which he bundles these great themes of the Bible reveals that he was by no means an ignorant fisherman. A great change is seen in the life of Peter from these epistles. He had been impetuous, but now he is patient. He was uh, bungling, fumbling, and stumbling when he first met Jesus. Our Lord told him, in effect, "You are a pretty weak man now, but I am going to make you a Petros, a rock man, and you will be built upon the foundation of Jesus Christ, who is the rock." Peter made it very clear that the Lord Jesus is the rock on which the church is built. It is very interesting that although his name means rock, he says that all believers are little rocks also. He also says, "Ye also, as lively stones, are built up a spiritual house." First Peter chapter 2 and verse 5. I guess that's what Jesus meant, that the rocks would cry out. In other words, he is saying that every believer is a Peter. Simon Peter never takes an exalted position, as we shall see in this epistle. As he opens this epistle, he calls himself an apostle. He is just one of them, although whenever the names of the apostles were numbered, his is always first on the list. And although the Lord chose him to preach the first sermon on the day of Pentecost, he did not feel that he was exalted above the others. Peter wrote an epistle after Paul had written his epistle, somewhere between AD 64 and 67, after bloody Nero had come to the throne and persecution was already breaking out. According to tradition, Peter himself suffered martyrdom. And that concludes, that's the introduction of the introduction section. Now we're going to move on to the origin section of the introduction. Make sure I got volume. Section. Now we're going to move on. Sounds good to me. Let me know if my volume doesn't sound good, and I will work on it or see if there's something I can do. Anyway, the church that is at Babylon, elected together with you, salute you, and so doth Marcus, my son. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 13. There are those who think that Babylon is used here in a symbolic manner or in a metaphorical sense, and that Peter really meant Rome. However, there is no reason for him to use it in a metaphorical sense. Peter was an apostle who did not write in a symbolic manner, which, as we find, used by John in the book of Revelations. Peter writes better, very literally and practically. He gets down to where the rubber meets the road, right down on the asphalt of life. I believe that if he had meant Rome, he would have said Rome. My own opinion is that Simon Peter never did go to Rome. I think he was in Asia Minor, the great heart of the Roman Empire, but he was not the apostle who opened up the territory. I think he followed Paul. Paul would not have gone to Rome if Peter had already been in Rome preaching the gospel there, because Paul made it very clear that he went into places where the gospel had not been preached before. Since Rome was on Paul's itinerary, it seems obvious that Paul, not Peter, founded the church at Rome. Let me repeat that again. Since Rome was on Paul's itinerary, it seems obvious that Paul, not Peter, founded the church at Rome. Since another very valid argument to indicate that Peter was in Babylon rather than in Rome is based on the list of places which he addresses to the strangers scattered throughout Pontius and Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 1. All these places are in Asia Minor, the area which is called Turkey today. In listing them, he moves from east to west. This suggests that the writer is in the east at the time of the writing. The natural and ordinary way to list geographical places is beginning from the point where you are. When I am in California, I talk about going east. I would say that I am going through Arizona, Texas, and finally New York. It is normal to begin where I am and to name the places in sequence. Since Peter lists the places from east to west, it would seem logical that he was in literal Babylon. After the Babylonian captivity, only a very small group of Jews returned to their land. Actually, there were fewer than 60,000. There was still a great colony of Jews in Babylon. Additional Jews had fled to Babylon when several persecutions began under Claudius in Rome. We know, for example, that Priscilla and Aquila fled to Corinth from Rome. Many others fled to Babylon. There was persecution both of Christians and of Jews, since we know that the ministry of Peter was primarily to the Jews. It seems most logical that he ministered to Jewish colonies in Asia Minor. The practicality, the particularly in particularly in Babylon. Babylon was still a great city there on the Euphrates River, and many of the Jews had remained there after the end of the captivity. In spite of the fact that Papias mentioned the death of Peter as occurring in Rome, there is no substantial historical basis for this supposition. I see no reason to discount the fact that Simon Peter was the apostle to those of the nation of Israel who were scattered abroad. I believe Peter went east while the apostle Paul went west. And that concludes the section on the origin of this book. Now we're going to move on to the theme of this book. The introduction is about 20 minutes long, so if you'll bear with me, we'll get through it here in a second. The great theme of this epistle of Peter is Christian hope in the time of trial. Although Peter deals with great doctrines and handles weighty subjects, he doesn't write in a cold manner. Peter has been called the apostle of hope, while Paul has been called the apostle of faith, and John has been called the apostle of love. This epistle puts a great emphasis upon hope, but I believe that the word which conveys the theme of this epistle is suffering. Peter also emphasizes the grace of God, and some expositors feel it is his main emphasis. However, the word suffering, or some uh, conjugate word that go with it, occur in this epistle 16 times. Hope is always tied with the suffering. Therefore, I think it is fair to say that the theme is the Christian hope in the time of trial. Peter will give a great deal, uh, will have a great deal to say about the suffering of Christ. The suffering of Christ has been dealt with by the writer of the Hebrew epistle and by James and his epistle. Also, the prophet certainly mentions it. However, Peter will handle the subject a little differently. Peter speaks out of a rich experience. Dr. Robert Layton, in his book, the periodical commentary on First Peter, makes a very timely comment that applies to Simon Peter. Let me share this with you because it is worth noting. It is cold and lifeless thing to speak of spiritual things on mere report, but when men can speak of them as their own, as having shared the interest in theme and some experience of their sweetness, their discourse of them is enlightened with firm belief and ardent affection. They cannot mention them, but straight their hearts are taken with such gladness as they are forced to vent in praises. For this reason, Simon Peter, while writing of suffering, emphasizes joy. This leads me to say something very important regarding young preachers. In this day, we uh, have about us some very wonderful young expositors of the world. I thank God for them. However, as I have listened to two or three of them, I feel very much as Dr. G. Campbell Morgan felt in his day. He and his wife went to hear a young preacher in whom they were particularly interested. He was eloquent, fine looking, and he delivered a great sermon. Afterward, on the way home, Mrs. Morgan was profuse in her praise and was surprised that Dr. Morgan made no response. Finally, she asked, "Do you think he is a great preacher?" He answered, "He will be after he suffers." Well, time went by, and this young man found out by experience what it cost to stand for Christ. He went through persecution. He experienced problems in his church. And one day he stood in an open grave as he buried one of his little children. Dr. Morgan and his wife went to hear him again because they loved this young man. After the service, Mrs. Morgan asked, "Well, what do you think of him now?" Dr. Morgan answered, "He is a great preacher." You see, suffering had made the difference. This has been my personal experience also. As a young preacher, I spoke a great deal about standing for the Lord and about suffering. I used to go to hospitals and pat people on the hand and pray for them, and I would tell them that the Lord would be with them. At that time, I was a professional preacher, saying what I did not know to be true from my own experience, although I believed it. But the day came when I went into the hospital myself. Another preacher came in and prayed with me. When he started to go, I said to him, "I've done the same thing you have done. I've been here and I have told people that God would be with them. Now you are going to walk out of here, but I am staying. And I will find out if it is a theory or if what I have been telling people is true." Friend, I found out it is true. Now it is no longer a mere theory. I know it by the fact that the Word of God says it and by the fact that I have experienced it. I don't agree with people about these things anymore because they are certain things I know. I would never argue with you about whether honey is sweet or not. If you don't think it is sweet, that is your business. I had some this morning for breakfast, and I know it is sweet. That is the knowledge that comes from experience. I'm reading through the Bible by J. Vernon McGee, and I didn't have any honey this morning for breakfast, so I don't want to lie as I'm reading, but most of the other things he says can apply to my life. Simon Peter is not going to give us his theory of suffering. Simon Peter is going to speak to us out of our own tremendous experience. It is, and it will become very wonderful to us as it becomes your experience and my experience. Now, there's an outline here, and I did put a link in down below in the description where you can click it. And apparently, I guess it's at Amazon or something like that. You can click it and pull up the actually the outline and the notes, the whole kit and caboodle for First Peter, and we are going to uh, use one of the charts that's in those notes and outlines. If you want to go ahead and pull that up on your phone while you're listening to me, that would be great. You can follow along. And so that concludes that section. Includes the section we actually got two there, the theme and the outline. I'm not going to go over the outline. You can see it for yourself. I wish as a young preacher I had that outline. If you're a young preacher, I uh, uh, would uh, garnish it and be in awe of having an outline. of the book of Peter. Any outlines are always helpful for us preachers. And so that we're now going to get started in Peter chapter 1. The theme of Peter in chapter 1 is suffering and security produces joy. Suffering and the scriptures produces holiness. Now, I'm going to warn you ahead of time. It's about this is about a 2 hours for J. Vernon McGee, so it's probably going to be 2.5, maybe 3 hours for me. Of course, he does spend a lot of time that I'm not going to spend. That's not in here in the radio program. That's omitted from the commentary. So he kinds of takes it down. There's a lot of quotes from Schofield, from the Schofield Bible that was taken out. There's actually two different quotes that he took out of this, and so it mine will be hopefully could be shorter. So we'll see. You can see if I get it under 2 hours or if it's 2.5 or 3 hours. But anyway, so I'm already at 20 minutes. Well, that's about what that I calculated the introduction would be. Verse 1. So this is the first one is entitled Suffering and the Security of the Believer. A great many folk, oh, I didn't get me a drink. Sorry. Let me get a drink. My throat is telling me that I'm suffering. It's kind of like I'm drinking salt water while I'm talking. I die of thirst. The title of verse 1 is Suffering and the Security of the Believer. A great many folk have never had the feeling of assurance in their salvation. The security of the believer is a doctrine which I believe, although it took me a long time to come to the place of assurance in my own salvation. And there are many folk who do not have the assurance of their salvation. Why? Because suffering and the security of the believer go together. And do you know what this produces? It produces joy. Can you imagine that? Now, this first verse is just loaded with meaning. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the strangers scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 1. First of all, note his name, Peter, Petros in the Greek, a stone. And he is now the rock man. The day of Pentecost is behind him, and he knows that it is what it is to take a stand for Christ. He has been arrested and put in jail. He has been threatened, and he realized that there is it's crucifixion on a cross ahead of him. Peter is a man who knows what he is talking about, my friend. I must confess that I am not impressed by professors in theological seminaries with little, if any, experience as pastors who get up and spin off some little theory to prepare young men for the ministry. They don't really know the problem of a pastorate because they haven't had the experience. They don't know it is what it is really to suffer for Christ. After hearing them, I feel like turning back to Peter's first letter and reading it again because I believe Peter. He knew what it was talking about. I'm sorry, but I don't trust these young professors. I want to hear from the man who has gone through the experiences. Peter, an apostle of Christ. Peter is an apostle of Jesus Christ. That is all he claimed to be, although he always heads my list of apostles. I love him. He is not to be placed above the other apostles. When Paul went to Jerusalem to confer with the apostles, he talked with Peter, James, and John. That's his inner circle. The main three. Peter was actually on top. And he said that they seemed to be the pillars of the church, but he did not learn the gospel from them. Paul makes it very clear that he received the gospel directly from Jesus Christ by revelation. Therefore, does Peter claim superiority? Uh, Nowhere does Peter claim superiority. He was an apostle. That's all. To the strangers scattered through Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. I pronounced it earlier fairly well. Why couldn't I do it then? He is writing to the strangers or aliens who were scattered throughout the Roman Empire. They were Jews called the diaspora because they were no longer in the land of Palestine. Due to persecution and other reasons, they were scattered